We are going to see a Trump who is unleashed in this administration, who has fewer wise advisors around him, who has a deep sense of vengeance, and who has a court majority, basically, that will probably aid and abet his decisions.
The Democrats have to look reality in the face this time and recognize that this is the result that Americans wanted, and they need to offer something more appealing to the American people if they want to win elections.
In his victory speech, he spent a good chunk of time talking about Elon Musk and his SpaceX rocket ship. So I think he's going to begin to reward those people who he saw as his supporters.
Is he an authoritarian? Is that what America's got now as a president? Well, welcome to this latest edition of the American Forecast. With me, my two guests, Molly Ball from the Wall Street Journal, Christine Emba from The Atlantic. Thanks, both of you, for making this time. Did you get any sleep, Christine?
I actually did get a little bit of sleep. I'm awake this morning, and it seems that Donald Trump will be our next president.
These are words, Molly, that most people that I spoke to, even if they were going to vote for him, never thought they would actually be uttering on Wednesday morning.
Which is odd because, this is not that shocking of a result if you were following the polls and believing what they said. It was always likely that one or the other of these two candidates would sweep all of the swing states by a narrow margin. And that is indeed what Donald Trump appears to have done. And that is very much in line with what the polls were telling us going into the election, where the candidates were basically tied within the margin of error in all of the swing states.
Did you expect him to win the popular vote, Molly?
I try not to have expectations or make predictions about politics, but again, that is a result that is basically in line with what the polls were telling us, which was that this was a close race within the margin of error.
Christine, what really surprised me was that as the exit polls, emerged overnight, one of the biggest concerns in a whole number of swing states was the issue of democracy. And I kind of interpreted that to mean a vote against Donald Trump for Kamala Harris. It turns out I was wrong.
Yeah, no, I think that was a result that surprised a lot of people, and I think will have woken many people up. Yes, the concern for democracy was great on, the liberal side, on the Democratic side. It was clearly the idea that Donald Trump was an autocrat, a fascist. That was the message. But I think many commentators forgot to think about the other side, who were also hearing this message about democracy. When Joe Rogan endorsed Donald Trump the day before the election in conversation with Elon Musk, their conversation centered around how if Kamala Harris was elected president, there would be no more elections. They were accusing the other side of communism, socialism, of destroying the American state. So there were concerns about democracy on the Republican side too. Were they well-founded? I mean, we'll see. But democracy can mean very different things to different people.
And I just want to underscore that because, we don't want to read too much into exit polls, but I'm looking right now at the CNN exit poll, and they asked the voters, how threatened do you believe democracy in the United States is, secure or threatened? A plurality of voters, 38%, said democracy in the U.S. is very threatened. Trump won those voters, 50 to 48%. And I think if you had been listening to Republican voters, if you had been listening to Trump voters over the course of this campaign, you would know, as Christine said, that they too harbored these deep concerns about the future of democracy.
I mean, I spent quite a bit of time in Pennsylvania, as have most of us in the last few weeks. And it was so interesting going to, a Trump event and a Harris event, and you ask them that open question, what's at stake for you in America? And you're right, Christine, both sides would say, what's at stake is the future of democracy. And you think, hang on a minute, I thought that was the line the Democrats used, but actually turns out Republicans use that line as well. What about abortion? Because again, people assumed that reproductive rights, Roe v. Wade being overturned by the Supreme Court, would be something that would drive women to the polls in such huge numbers that there was no way that Trump could win. Obviously, Christine, that didn't happen.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, I think Democrats banked on that as a really, really galvanizing issue. A lot of their ad spend focused on, these terrifying and sad stories of women whose lives were lost or who were irreparably harmed by not being able to get reproductive care. And while those were affecting, they did tend to be a heavily gendered message. And, I think that they were messages that, while heart wrenching, didn't necessarily address what, again, the exit polls told us were the core concerns of voters. This question of democracy and also, frankly, just the economy. As, past politicians have said often, it's the economy, stupid. And maybe that is something that the Democrats should have spent more time on, simply because that was closer to hand for a wider swath of voters.
Molly, I can't tell you how many podcasts I listened to where both men and women were saying, well, if you rely on men for your victory, you're in big trouble because the blokes never get off the sofa to actually do what they're supposed to be doing, which is cast a ballot. It turns out that they did, and they are a force in politics, and one shouldn't be surprised by that.
We saw what we usually see, which is a disproportionately female electorate. About 53% of the electorate was women, and Harris won women while Trump won men by about equivalent margins, to about 10-point margins. So in fact, this likely will not be a historic gender gap. It is about in line with what we have seen. So I think, as Christine was saying, while we did see a gender gap in these numbers, it was not as extreme as Democrats hoped. They were not able to really drive up either the turnout or the level of her support among women beyond where it would sort of naturally be in the course of regular partisan politics.
Christine, there are people who worked for Trump and described him as a fascist. Most importantly, John Kelly, his former chief of staff, Mark Milley, the country's top soldiers, said this guy's dangerous. He's a wannabe dictator. Plenty of people on the campaign trail said it. As we said earlier, the end of democracy was something that Democrats kind of baked into their campaign. Do you think that language, combined with the charges against him in the courts, was overstepping the line? That actually that was far more damaging to the Harris campaign in the end than the Trump campaign, because many ordinary Americans saw that, as just hysteria, or in the case of the courts, an infringement on, individual rights.
I'm not sure that the language was overstepping the line in that many of those, generals and former Trump employees were just repeating the words that he himself said. But you have to wonder if Democrats maybe over relied on that case. They also have relied on it in the past. They've sort of been banging the, Trump is bad for democracy is on the ballot, etc. Trump for the past two elections. And eventually it becomes a little bit of a boy who cried wolf situation, right? Trump was president, contrary to, some of the more extreme claims of the Democratic Party. America did not completely collapse. So saying that again just doesn't have quite the same punch as it might have if it were the first time.
But let's be clear. I mean, Trump as well as anyone else does. We've all read the stuff. We all know what he did in his first administration. We remember those quotes on the campaign. Is he an authoritarian? Is that what America's got now as a president?
I mean, I think we're going to have to see whether he lives up to the statements that he made. He's not actually famous for living up to what he has said he will do. That's not something Trump is known for. But I think we are going to see a Trump who is unleashed in this administration, who has fewer wise advisors around him, who has a deep sense of vengeance, and who has a court majority, basically, that will probably aid and abet his decisions. What that actually looks like day to day, we'll see. But I'm not optimistic.
Right. Molly, what about you? The Supreme Court has handed him, any president, whatever they're called, extraordinary powers. Does that worry you?
I think, Trump has made very clear that he has little respect for the historic norms that have governed our politics or the institution. In fact, much of his sort of pitch to voters was that he viewed these institutions as rotten and corrupt and promised to smash them. So I think there's very little doubt that he will, for example, fire the head of the FBI and the special counsel and make the criminal cases still standing against him go away. The Supreme Court, as Christine said, has helped clear the way for him to do that by establishing a broad right of immunity for him and for all presidents going forward. I think it's up to the scholars and those who study semantics to decide what constitutes an authoritarian. But I think he certainly is poised to govern in a way that contradicts a lot of people's assumptions about what ought to be the guardrails on the presidency. And certainly he did that last time as well. And as Christine said, there will be far fewer restraints on him this time around.
Let me ask this in a very delicate way. Christine, we've spoken a lot over the last 2 months, and I remember your criticism of Trump being quite trenchant. Do I detect a hint of maybe self-restraint in what you're saying to me this morning after his victory?
I wouldn't say that my criticism today is less trenchant than it has been in the past. I think, we're all waking up this morning to a new result. Results are still trickling in, votes are still being counted. And until we have more information, I think it will be, difficult to make conclusive statements about what the next administration will look like. And I do want to be, respectful of the information that we have and not leap ahead of the facts. But, we can make some assumptions or conjectures based on Trump's past behavior, based on past politics. That said, we're also seeing some of the expectations that we had for, this election for the next 4 years, perhaps being upended. And I think we have to hold back until we see what's really going on.
Just briefly on this point, I interviewed Fiona Hill a few months ago, who, of course, was, the Russia expert, both in the Bush administration, then the Obama administration, then the Trump administration. She was one of the star witnesses in the Russia interference hearings on the Hill. And she said that if Trump gets reelected, she is afraid of getting a knock on the door one day, of being hounded by Trump's administration. Do you think that's an unreasonable fear, Christine?
I actually don't. It's interesting. As you know, I was on IDN doing commentary with a number of people, including Stormy Daniels, and she made an actual non-joke that, she was worried that in the next Trump administration, she would be arrested again. She joked that she would be able to complete her set of 4 different mugshots, but she was very clear that she expected Trump to come after her if he had the power to win and come after more of his enemies. I don't actually think that that's an unfair thing to think at all. It's what he said he would do.
And that, I think, is the point, is that this isn't some kind of, liberal conjecture. This is these are explicit promises that Trump has made. Now, maybe it's bluster. Maybe he's not being serious. I think a lot of his supporters don't necessarily take all of his many threats seriously. But he has said that, for example, he believes Liz Cheney belongs in front of a military tribunal. He has said he plans to refashion the Justice Department into an instrument of his will and prosecute his enemies. Many of his supporters have said that one of his and their regrets from his first presidency is that after promising to lock up Hillary Clinton, he didn't actually do it. So these are not this is not wild speculation. This is based on the reporting and on the things that Trump himself has promised.
What are the 3 things you expect him to do as soon as he gets back into that White House?
I think this idea of beginning to dismantle and weaponize the Justice Department is going to be one of the first things that he does, in part so that he can do away with any guardrails against him and any cases that are still lingering against him. I can see him installing kind of immediately some of his boosters and supporters. Even in his victory speech last night, apparently he spent a good chunk of time talking about Elon Musk and his SpaceX rocket ship. So I think he's going to begin to reward those people who he saw as his supporters. So that would be perhaps the flip side of weaponizing things against his enemies. And as for a third, I feel like we're going to see a real cleaning house of experts, frankly, of longstanding civil servants who may have worked for past administrations who Trump saw as contradicting him or not in favor of his policies, and installing his friends.
What about you, Molly? 3 things he's going to do as soon as he gets in there.
I think Christine's right about the Justice Department. That will absolutely be one of his top priorities, given how imperiled, he has personally felt by these legal cases. He has promised to seal the border and deport unauthorized immigrants en masse. And his advisors and the people around him are quite serious about this and have drawn up plans for him to utilize executive authority to do that. He's promised massive across-the-board tariffs. Many of the people around him and many of our readers on Wall Street believe that this is sort of an idle threat being used for leverage as a negotiating posture. We will see if he's serious about it, but he certainly says it in every single speech. And he has also promised that before he even takes office, he will have resolved the war in Ukraine. His critics believe that he intends to do that by brokering a deal that is favorable to Putin. We'll see what, if any, resolution he's able to bring to that, but that is certainly a top priority for him.
I think that Trump promises a return to instability. We're not sure what he's going to do. We're not sure what actions he's going to take. He does not necessarily act in a reasonable or trackable or predictable manner. And uncertainty in this way is dangerous for financial markets, for international stability, for our allies continuing to remain our allies and rely on us and allow us to rely on them.
Many Americans are feeling a lot of fear today. And, we asked this question in our final Wall Street Journal poll a couple of weeks ago. 87% of voters said they believed that the country would sustain permanent damage if their candidate did not prevail. And 57% of Kamala Harris supporters said the principal emotion that they would feel if Trump were elected was fear, with smaller percentages saying, the sort of milder reactions of anger or disappointment that I think are relatively normal when your side loses an election. This was an election that inspired massive turnout. People felt the stakes were very high over and over again. Voters told me that this did not feel like a normal election to them. It felt like a sort of hinge point in history with everything at stake. So it is certainly the case that a lot of people in this country are feeling a sense of fear today.
There are people, all over the world who will be saying, and some of them told me, there's no way America will elect a black woman as president. They didn't elect Hillary Clinton. They're not going to do that with Kamala Harris. It's just not going to happen. The country will never do that. And I said, don't be ridiculous. They had a black president before we had a prime minister of color in the UK. You're completely underestimating this country. It's diverse, it's versatile, and it's prepared to do this. I guess I was wrong. Molly, what does it say about this country that it can't elect a female president, let alone one of color?
Well, it hasn't. I don't know that means it can't. I think there were so many factors that went into this that, it's impossible for anyone to say definitively that was the reason. Look, I think the fundamental dynamic, the story of this election, which is the same story you could have told a year ago or even 2 years ago, was that the electorate wanted change and the Democrats refused to give it to them. And over and over and over again, people told pollsters by overwhelming margins they believed the country was on the wrong track. They did not like the way the administration was managing immigration. They did not like the way the administration was managing the border. The immigration and inflation, the economy. And over and over again, the administration, which includes Kamala Harris, and Kamala Harris, who said that she would not have done anything differently than Joe Biden has done. And the Democrats' answer was to sort of say, well, we're right, and you just have to hang on and believe, or to blame Donald Trump for the problems that were occurring on their watch. So I think it's fundamentally unknowable whether I would also note, though, that Donald Trump, again, did not do any worse with women than he has done in the past, and did much better with minorities, with Black and Latino voters, than he has done in the past. So the idea that was the major obstacle for all of those voters, it certainly could still be the case, but it requires you to believe that it was a lot of Black voters and women voters who harbored those sentiments.
Is this a mistake that we reporters, those of us with emotions and opinions, make, that we think that demography is destiny and it just isn't always, or maybe even sometimes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that this election is going to cause a real reckoning in sort of the media and analytical class. I think that over the past several years, especially in this election, we saw evidence of, some real great divergences from the past, new coalitions forming. You couldn't take for granted necessarily the beliefs of Black voters or female voters or male voters. And it does feel like the media didn't catch up in time. We saw some of these shifts happening and assumed, well, Latinos will be mad at this, or obviously Black people will support a Black candidate, and that's just not necessarily the case anymore. So I think we have a lot of hard thinking to do ahead of us.
If I could just defend the media for a moment, I think actually, all of these phenomena were covered extensively in the media. It was the Democrats who said this isn't really happening, despite the fact that hundreds of polls showed these shifts and all kinds of anecdotal evidence was making clear that it was really happening. It was the Harris campaign and the Democrats who said over and over and over again, this isn't real. And they got their comeuppance.
That is a fair point.
I'll take that defense of the media. Christine, you first. What's going to happen to the Democratic Party now? Clearly, the knives are already out, right? There's a lot of licking of wounds. There's a lot of blaming that's going on. What's going to happen to the party?
Yeah, the knives are out. I'm wondering if we're going to see the fissures that were already visible in the party grow even deeper and see some real battling it out. There were Democratic moderates. There were sort of the party knows best, the let's move forward with Joe Biden and then Kamala Harris wing of the party. There was also a huge left resistance within the party who wanted to push back against the Biden policies on Israel Gaza, which potentially lost Kamala Harris a lot of votes in a key swing state in Michigan. There were leftists who wanted much more attention paid to family care issues, worker care issues, yes, even stronger brands of feminism and sort of gender questions than the Democratic Party gave. And I don't know if there will be visible splits, if there will be new parties or new groups formed, but I think there's going to be a lot of internal anger. And I'm interested to see where that goes and how that's translated into policy and statements moving forward.
Molly, the Democrats used to love to point to the Republicans and say, you have become, the hostage to Donald Trump. It's a corporate takeover, and you are now Trump's creatures. Well, that may be the case, but that creature's also won an election, with a resounding majority. The Democrats are far more divided, perhaps, than people gave them credit for at the time.
After Hillary Clinton lost, the Democrats, went into resistance mode and spent the next 4 years freaking out constantly over Donald Trump. But it was possible for them to see him as a sort of freak accident, an aberration. He had not won the popular vote. No one had expected him to win. So and the election was extremely close. So you could blame any number of sort of exogenous factors for this freak occurrence. That's not the case anymore. This election has delivered a mandate to Donald Trump. As you said, he has won the popular vote. He has won all of these swing states by slim but healthy margins. And so I think the Democrats have to look reality in the face this time and recognize that this is the result that Americans wanted, and they need to offer something more appealing to the American people if they want to win elections.
Indeed, I think Joe Biden described the first Trump administration as an apparent moment in American history. It turns out it wasn't. To both of you, Molly Ball of the Wall Street Journal, Christine Emba of The Atlantic, thank you very much for taking part in the American Fourcast. Have a good day. Get some sleep.